Welcome back everyone, and I am delighted to be introducing a whole new continent to the stage in a moment. We're going to be talking about, well, there's a wonderful panel discussion format that we've got here called What's Wrong With, and we're talking about supply chains. And I'm going to hand over now to Pinar Govenk from the New York and Istanbul based architecture practice Sauer, but she's in New York. So Pinar, over to you and welcome to the virtual stage.
Hi, Fraser, and thank you so much for having us. I really apologize for my voice today. I did my best to make sounds today, and this is the extent that I can do it. But thankfully, I'm going to be moderating, and we'll be doing the minimal talking. So we're very happy to be here today. We're huge fans of WasteBuild. And to quickly introduce myself, I'm Pinar, partner of Sauer. And as Fraser mentioned, we are an architecture and design studio with the mission of addressing social and urban problems. And we do realize in order for able to really come up with solutions for the problems we're seeing in the world, we do need to have a collective education and understanding and awareness in the various issues that we face in the world. Hence, we started the What's Wrong With series back in 2017, where we have diagnostic panel discussions about different topics, and we ideate solutions with experts and progress makers in the field. So today we'll be talking about supply chains, and we have a fantastic panel here that represent really diverse industries and perspectives on supply chain itself. So I will pass it to everyone to introduce themselves and their backgrounds, and we'll take the conversation from there. And I'll start with passing to Lisa.
Hi, my name is Lisa Morales-Hellebeau, and I am, a GP in Refashion Ventures. We invest in all things supply chain innovation across data, AI, advanced materials, advanced manufacturing, and advanced logistics. I'm also CEO and co-founder of a company called Refashioned OS. We are refashioning the apparel supply chain as a distributed collaborative network of microfactories connected via shared data layer with real-time throughput capacity load bearing. And then our volume shifts from your finished goods, which are now one-offs on demand, to your raw materials, which we're looking to partner with circular regenerative textiles. So everything we produce can be consumed and regenerated within about a 700-mile radius. I'm also co-founder of the Worldwide Supply Chain Federation. It is one of the largest organizations of supply chain enthusiasts and nerds like ourselves. We have 4,000 members on every continent except for Antarctica and about 40,000 in our global network. We're extremely inclusive, and our passion is to connect builders and buyers to have real conversations about innovations in supply chain so that they can gain traction and scale quicker.
Thank you. And I'll continue with Kai.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kai. I'm the founder of Cambodia. Thank you again to WasteBuild and Sauer for having me here today with these inspiring panelists. I'm super excited to hear everybody else's views of what they're doing and how the solutions they're addressing today's and tomorrow's problems. Like I said, I'm the founder of Cambodia. Cambodia is I developed it in 2015 when I moved to Cambodia in 2014 to address the plastic pollution problem there. If anyone's ever been to any developing countries, we know there's huge infrastructure problems, and a lot of that deals with the cheapness and the usability of plastic. And when I was there in 2015, I decided that there was so much plastic pollution and so much it was upsetting me so much that I needed to be a part of the solution. So unlike some of my colleagues on the panel, I don't have a chemical engineering degree or a long history in what I'm doing. This is something that I was inspired to do and learning as I go. But in Cambodia, we need to introduce a biodegradable bag made of cassava. Some people know it as yucca or tapioca. And our biodegradable bags degrade within 6 years and help address the plastic pollution problem in Southeast Asia as well as continents across the country.
I love it. Thank you. Olcay.
Hello, this is Olcay. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Fazla Gıda. In direct translation, it means surplus food. The global brand is Whole Surplus. Also, I'm the co-founder of Food Rescue Association in Turkey. Food Rescue Association is the biggest food banking network currently. At Fazla Gıda site, we are a technology-based platform that is connecting all the surplus owners and the ones who can use it for better purposes. And so far, we have managed more than 20,000 tons of food and delivered more than 1 million people the surplus foods monthly basis. So this is the summary. Thank you.
Thank you. And last but not least, Thomas.
Hi, everybody. I'm Thomas Marinelli. And first of all, I would also like to thank Sauer to invite us. And it's great to have these members in the panel. I think they're all very important global challenges. So each of you are tackling great sustainability topics. I'm working for the last 18 years for Signify, probably more known by most of you for Philips lighting. So I'm in the lighting industry, so electronic products. I've been working the last 80 years in all kinds of sustainability topics, and I'm really happy that it was given me the chance to work on those. Just to name you a few is circular economy is really lately a hot topic. Circular lighting is a business model we have developed, supported by the circular design. Before I worked for packaging. I'm very proud of the project we did to helping a little bit Kai by stopping using plastic in packaging material in consumer products. We are also working hard to phase out as much as the harmful chemicals, but that's a challenge in such a thing like electronics. But still, you can work on more on renewable materials. And what I'm also very enthusiastic about is that for me, sustainability is, of course, environmental topics, but certainly also how can we help people, social aspects of lighting. And just to name here the last ones is food availability. How can we help there? So I have a link with Olkay. Safety, security, also in getting more and more important. It's a very important sustainability topic, and health and well-being. And last but not least, energy efficiency, helping us to fight climate change is definitely on our agenda. Thanks.
Amazing. Thank you. And there's definitely no conversation of sustainability without the human factor. So thanks for the 360 coverage. So I guess when we talk about supply chain, there are systems that exist in any industry, right? And they touch upon from like materiality to production to inventory management, logistics, communication, information, all of that. And so many decisions also made outside of supply chain do impact supply chain, like design, and I guess like policy too. So when we're talking about such a mega system that involves so many different, not only, you know, like disciplines, but also demographics and geography, obviously we see a range of problems, but also that is the opportunity for a range of solutions as well. So to kick off the conversation, I guess, either like within your industry or in your experience, what are some very, I don't want to say problems, but really the underlying reasons of some of the problems we see today in the supply chain? And whoever wants to go first can go first.
I'll go with underlying reasons in the supply chain. Where do we get started? So I think a lot of the underlying issues with our current supply chain has been seeking the cheapest possible labor and materials, focusing on landed cost of goods sold, rather than really looking at your total cost of your end-to-end supply chain as a global infrastructure set. You know, people have become so in love with the, you know, $2 t-shirt that we got landed. Well, what was the cost of your supply chain to source the cotton that got shipped from one country to another to be milled, spun into fibers, and then shipped to another location to be lab dyed? You know, you have your manufacturing in another country and region where they have cheaper labor or better innovation with cheaper labor. And then, of course, your distribution, our global distribution of everyone needing every option of everything is literally insanity. So I think we're reaching that tipping point where we're realizing that our consumption has led to our own destruction. And we need to start making better systemic choices about what we truly need versus what we want, and how you start with the most basic needs and making them sustainable, circular, and local. There's no reason that we should have produce shipping from around the world and getting it just in time to have it sit in your fridge for a day before it goes bad. So I think it really requires systems thinkers to not just try to tackle one little component of the supply chain. A supply chain cannot exist in a vacuum. It needs to be end-to-end solutions.
I love that we already touched upon the human factor, right? Like so much of this is our own behavior and patterns and really biases and perceptions too, right? We once did a conversation, and again, in What's Wrong, where we were talking about how media is the biggest culprit in climate change. And it is true. I mean, why do we feel like we need to consume so much? Or Olcay would know this, like there's maybe it's still the case, but in Turkey, like imports would be considered luxury and it's better to have, which like, how did that happen, right? Like, how did we move out of local? So any other, like anyone wants to add anything, like maybe industry specific too, that you see that happens in addition to consumer behavior?
I can get in with the food side. You know, when we look at every single company, they use ERP systems, right, to be more efficient. You know, what is the input, where you store it, where are you going to use it, when, etc. These all the data and the systematic approaches they need to be able to function very well at one single company level. But when we look at this, all the ecosystem and sector and the supply chain is in the middle of this process, and we see that the connection point is that there are a lot of vacancies, let's say, in the connection point. So there is no like a sector-wise, ecosystem-wise ERP kind of approach. So in these vacancy points, what happens as an inefficiency happens there actually. This is one of the main problems as I see in the food industry as an inefficiency part. I just want to tap into that part for now, leaving it to the others. We may go back in detail.
Yeah, but it touches upon, like, I guess it feels for both Kai and Thomas too, because it's basically lack of infrastructure, whether that's digital or physical, right? I mean, Kai, you talked about like in Cambodia, the lack of it.
Yeah, it's and I was going to touch with you know, what Lisa said about the cheapness of products and such, and you know, that's a big challenge that we have in Cambodia because plastic is so cheap, and as well as it's considered a luxury item. Often plastic bags are considered Western or clean, preferred to, you know, places like India that sometimes use bowls that are made out of leaves that for curries and such like that, where that's considered maybe dirty, not hygienic. So one of our challenges is definitely selling a product that, you know, most environmental products, green products are more expensive, and getting the message to our customers that, you know, even though it's more expensive today, the cost is going to be way more expensive in the future. And that can be a big challenge to let people know that, you know, you might be saving some money today, but in future generations or in the next decade, these effects are going to come down the line, and we're going to have to pay for those at some point or other.
Yeah, and I think it's, you know, even maybe more prominent in developing countries where decisions are made for very much short term. There is not much long-term planning. So for, you know, executives and leaders and companies that are also sourcing, and when the stakeholder like profits are more important, maybe you just like, how do I bring down costs today? And I don't worry about 10 years from now. Sure. But when you move on to, I guess, like more, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, and you know, and the end users, you know, in these developing countries too. One thing I also always have to remind myself is that the environment is not the most important factor for many people of our end users. Sometimes it's where they're going to get food the next day, What about the health? There might be multi-generations living in the household and caring for grandparents and parents and such like that. So have to be mindful in certain situations of how aggressive or how we approach these kind of issues with the environment.
Exactly, like survival more than like planning for futures. When that's priority, it's a problem. And
Exactly.
Thomas, you kind of see this in sort of like a global and almost like multi-industry, as lighting goes into like many different places and spaces too. So and also I guess like you have this like more corporate background that could allow the infrastructure and the resources that you need to be able to make these shifts. But what are the challenges you see in there when you're trying to work at such scale and size too?
Well, thanks for the question. I think do one step back, because it is linking many of the topics already mentioned. And just lately I read an article where somebody said, I like the word, he said, the circular economy could be a bridge between many of these challenges, because the plastic was mentioned. We are really struggling because we have so much single-use plastic, which is feeding this huge mountain of waste. It's the same in clothes, what Lisa was bringing forward. So that's, again, and that's not only in those areas. And food, we had already a little bit of a side discussion where we said the food is created in such a way that most of it is already waste before it reaches our fork. And I think also in the electronics industry, which is very global, also the lighting, we sell in more than 70 countries, as far as I know. We are really thinking about how can we make the circular happen. And it's interesting, also from a supply chain perspective, it's really challenging in many ways. It is the digitalization we already mentioned, because you need the information. In a previous job, I worked on conflict minerals, for example. We were really challenged. Can we really go back and know where this this material is coming from? That has all to do with more clarity, more transparency, better data integration and data sharing. Very important, I think. Plus, you also need both sides in the supply chain. So in the value chain, you say, you need on the one side suppliers which can think with you not to go for the cheapest, but for something you can reuse, recycle, extend the lifetime as much as possible. And on the other side, you need a customer who also accepts it and is also ready, maybe not to have a huge amount of money, so have an capex, but thinks more in opex. So seeing on the supply chain, you have to work with your suppliers much more closely. I would also hope more locally, so we don't have to transport it all over the whole of the world, but that are decisions I cannot make. But at least your supply chain, the mindset has to change. And immediately, that's why it's a bridge, all this will avoid a lot of waste, and it will help also save a lot of energy.
Couldn't agree
100%.
more.
And I know, Lisa, you're going to add something,
Yeah.
and your wealth of knowledge, so please do.
I think demand chains are the bridge between supply chains and circular infrastructure. So a supply chain is you are trying to predict the future, to produce enough supply to meet the projected future demand. But a demand chain, you are starting with an entirely different paradigm of constraints. What are the things that your consumers need? What are the most ubiquitous materials that go into the things that those consumers need? How can you source, what are the options to source those materials locally? And then you start to build and define your products. So it is a totally flipped supply chain where you can design and have a digital 3D option of your design. We've seen an explosion of NFTs and virtual fashion, and that is fabulous, and it's been a little bit of a hype cycle, but we believe it's merchandising. It's merchandising without the waste and without having to produce physical samples. You can get ahead of what your consumer wants if you can produce something in real time, push it out to the market when the trend is just starting to emerge, get pre-orders, and have everything produced on demand, post-purchase. So we're not shipping anything and pulling everything from the corners of the planet for whatever comes into a creative's head. We have to start with what your materials are locally and then design really for that constraints and for optimizing the consumer demand beforehand. It really is the only way that we can bring down costs and really teach the world that sustainable does not mean more cost. Let me repeat that. Most people believe that sustainable inherently means more expensive. Oh, well, is the consumer going to want to spend more? Guess what? It doesn't have to cost more. You actually, as a brand, specifically with fashion, if you're selling $100 a retail price product that you're purchasing in volume overseas that has to be shipped around the world and all the expense of your global staff and logistics and customs and tariffs, that product is still $100 retail. And the consumer is not going to see the fact that it cost you as a brand an additional 30 to 40% in margin erosion to get that landed cost to get to your $100 retail price. If you flip to a demand chain, we are literally taking out all that cost and reclaiming the 30 to 40% margin erosion. So the price to the consumer is still $100, but the brand gets a much healthier size of margin. So it ultimately is, do you want to be more profitable or do you want to stick with your landed cost of goods sold?
I love that so much also because, we often think practices, like new practices or common practices in other industries, maybe innovation in another one, right? And, the context of WasteBuild is generally around construction industry, but so much of what you're saying, Lisa, also applies within the construction industry as well. And this is just, as you said, like, first of all, starts with the mindset, right? The assumption that something more sustainable will be more costly. And maybe there were, products or, systems in the past that were, but guess what? That's prototyping, right? Like in tech industry, nobody says like, oh my God, the first prototype is so expensive, we can't go to market. There's an understanding that it's prototype and there will be iteration and there will be work to get it more cost effective. And that mindset really needs to be adopted by all the other industries so that we could make everything more cost efficient if the system really adopts that behavior, first of all. So, but to your point already, like, there are things that are reducing the cost by making circular, sustainable decisions already. And we just need to, move on to that. And I guess, there is definitely, and for all its vices, I guess one benefit of social media and the common platform of digitalization really enabled more awareness around the subject, at least, right? I don't think, and I often bring this up, we saw a climate strike that did not happen in past generations before. And, and I do see there's much more awareness and emphasis to this in younger generations than prior. So this could be where the demand side changes things. And as long as there is a demand, brands, companies, firms are going to have to start to change in order to be a relevant business, 10, 20 years from now. The problem is we can't start late. We're already late.
Yeah.
Like, we need to today.
I think part of the shift is that brands are assuming, oh, well, when my consumers demand it, then we'll make the change. But what they are not accounting for is that with innovation, you can change what your offering is entirely. You can give them things that are not possible within globalized supply chains, customization, personalization, super hyper localized graphics tied to whatever the local demographic is. On-demand sizing and fit. These are things that consumers have proven over time to pay up to 30% more than full retail price for. So if you're trying to just replicate your globalized supply chain and offer that to your consumer, you're missing the point.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I think what you're also touching upon is really getting to know your user better. And I do see like there's more even like positions now, and like globally we see more like design researchers and strategists, which is so important because we really need to not only have a better understanding of what we're producing and for who, but also potentially co-creating with them, right? Like engaging the end user early on in even ideation and innovation stage to really create outcomes that we know will appeal to the consumer. So that is like something, at least on the design side, we see that could be, you know, a way to like address issues. But I would love to hear everyone's thoughts on like, yes, we need to start like yesterday. And how do we at least start today? And, you know, also I would be very interested to hear in different scales, right? Like we have here from like startups to global companies. How do we start today to push? And then how can this be more, how can these changes sustain? And what is required to do so?
So maybe I can say something about this, because specifically what we are doing is changing the supply chain of food surplus management. And actually, I agree with Lisa and your comments. The one thing we were always saying to the potential clients was that you need to start changing the supply chain and the processes right now, because when you will need it, when you want to do it, you are not going to be able to do it. So this is not a one-day change. So you need to get ready. And actually, we saw this in COVID time. So when COVID came in place, as you all know, huge food surplus happened everywhere. And all the companies we were talking for a while just came in. And we told you that you should have been ready beforehand. So I think COVID showed this to everyone globally, in every sector, and so that will change something for future. And when we come to the point that what shall be done here, what I see as a good practice, as a start point, maybe you know, a Consumer Goods Forum started a campaign of 2025 10 20 30 project, for reducing food waste 50% in the supply chains. And the approach is very similar to the UN SDG targets of 2030. As a campaign, it started at a very macro level, and they, I guess, spent a lot of time defining the problem, but not the solution, defining the pains, but giving this problem and prioritizing this problem at CEO and board levels of huge companies, and creating some funding, or at least making an agenda, it worked well. It will work well, I guess, that I believe. So if you want to change it, we need to make it at the top level priority, because otherwise, as Lisa mentioned, yes, a lot of fundings needed for prototyping, developing the innovation and the time, etc. But if there is no macro level agenda, when you just work with directly with the task owners, job owners, the like director level, manager level, whoever in the client companies, in supply chain, they just want saving in day zero, day one. So okay, if we are gonna make money right now, let's do it. If we are gonna make money 2 years ahead, let's not do it. So that's the approach. And first, first of all, we need to change this mindset. I mean, when we think about innovation and R&D, usually it's for like space, electricity cars, etc. They understand this part usually, but I chain it in itself has a lot of innovation parts, and so everyone needs to change the mindset. And I really believe this should come from the board level, CEO level to bottom line. Not expecting this mindset shift to happen by itself is a very wishful thinking. So this is why I really like SDG campaign and 2025 campaign of Consumer Goods Forum.
Yeah, maybe I can add, because I like exactly your what you are putting on the table here, Olkay. Because maybe I can give an example from companies like, there are more companies, but Philips started already in the mid-90s on what they called sustainability programs, environmental programs in the beginning, and they embraced more and more topics. And what I like very much is that in our companies, we every time we made 4 or 5 year programs, like you said, don't start tomorrow, start today, or you should have started yesterday. And you also know, and that's the beauty when you can have the opportunity to integrate sustainability in your overall strategy, that you say, and now, dear C-suite, we come with a proposal for the next 5 years. And well, you can have certain successes, and again, also for the supply chain, because we are talking about supply chain here and the challenges we have. One of the things we said was we want to become a carbon neutral company. How do you do that? Well, you need partners for that. You need absolutely partners. You have to partner not only with suppliers who give you the materials, but you need to partner definitely also with the logistics people who bring the goods to you. Can be via water or air. Well, air is always difficult, but at least water and on the road, train or truck. We're really looking for partners who work on not using fuel-based how do you say it, energy for the ships. I know that there are certain logistics shipping companies who really turned away from fossil fuel and try to let their ships go on another alternative energy source. That's a very good way to reduce your CO2 footprint. You can work with, well, we have a partner in energy that you look for. Where is renewable energy? There are wind parks, there are solar parks where you can get it. So you get the chance when you have a program for the 4 or 5 years. The good thing is corporates are more and more going to publish the status, the progress, but also the hurdles and the failures. You have to share in your annual report, and then really people can see, hey, is this going forward? Why is it not going forward? This is how do you say it, a disappointment. And you can do that for carbon neutrality, but you can also say, I want to make a contribution to start designing and selling my products really circular. You bring attention to the topic. Again, you have to look for partners in the supply chain to make it happen. So I like very much the discussion we are having here now, that we say, don't start tomorrow. It's always tomorrow. No, make your program, and also trying to put a target, a dot on the horizon. And that is also to make the whole employee base of a company, make them enthusiastic for a topic. And you will always see in the company, when I talk to colleagues, some of them have never heard of the program. It can happen. But that also makes us aware, okay, we have to communicate more about it, internally and externally, to have the whole, employees and the whole base of our people behind it. Making step by step. So we started January 1st, we started with our new program. With most of the programs, we continue, like carbon neutrality, stop producing own waste. Also in your factories, don't throw stuff away. Try to either recycle it or reuse it in your own production. That could be also for other things. That could be in fashion, when you make clothes. Are there opportunities to, when you have a failure in your production, can you use the material again? And that's rethinking. And I don't say we are there, but what I like a lot is that we have these programs for 4 or 5 years. And you can follow it. We make steps. Every time again, we make steps.
I love a lot of everything that you're saying, but specifically collaboration. And I think one way to reframe thinking on reusing waste is, instead of reuse, remonetization. Think of it as literal money, that you can remonetize that same asset that you've already got sunk costs and time and resources into. So would you just throw money into the landfill or burn it? No, you need to find a way to remonetize your assets, which is what waste ultimately is. It's a design flaw if it's not integrated into your remonetization strategy.
We also call the circular economy approach is really preserving the value to the maximum. And it's quite interesting, because what happens a lot is that although the technical life of a product is not at the end, we throw it away. It's a pity, because intrinsically there's a lot of value still in the product. And it's for all products, not only electronics, it's for many products. Most products, it is absolutely the case. So how can we do that? That's a big question. And it's like you said, when you realize as a company you are throwing away money, and by the way, if you can extend the lifetime of product, you're also saving money for the user, for the consumer or the customer.
Yep. I think on collaboration, the one thing I'd love to point out is that most industries are looking for collaboration amongst themselves. But when you look at disruption and innovation, it always comes from outside, not from within. And so you really need to, if you're collaborating, look for the right people that are outside of your current industry that can come in with a different perspective and, you know, not keep the closed mind of, well, they don't know this space like we do. It's a lot of that thinking that stifles innovation within corporations.
Touching on that, Lisa.
And yeah, go ahead, Kai, please.
Oh, sorry. With collaboration, I'll say that we had fortunate to have a kind of an unlikely client. We do get a lot of requests from fashion companies wanting, you know, clear plastic bags to ship a single shirt in across whatever continent, and we unfortunately can't quite make those products, and don't know how good I feel about anyway making a one bag for one shirt type situation. But we did come across or someone reached out to us from who's been a customer for a while. Maybe you've heard of Outland Denim. They were one of the first businesses that I had come across that were really looking at their whole global supply chain and trying to make them environmental and socially aware, conscious decisions for their supply chain. And they really pushed us to look at what we do and not just look at what, you know, we're selling something environmentally friendly, but where does all that come from? Are the people helping produce that being treated right? Are we absolutely sure that what we're doing is in the best interest of the environment and the people that are around it? And that's something that I don't think, you know, as we're saying, collaboration would have pushed us to where we are today if we didn't have a customer or someone come in from outside of our industry and say, look at these a little bit closer, and how are you grading yourself on this?
I love that example, and I just, you know, basically the reason why we're having a conversation with lighting, fashion, food, and like a packaging expert is in a built environment summit is the reason why we're doing this. You know, like we genuinely believe also this like cross-disciplinary, diverse, global, collaborations are the ones that really push for innovation and change within our own industries. And we see this over and over again, and we just need to be really in that mindset when we're starting off. And I think we touched upon, it starts out with design. We're setting up the system to fail maybe because it's designed as such. And we see that in, politics, we see that in other fields. And it starts with like doing the right design and designing not only in consideration with sustainable materials, but the afterlife of it too. How do things come together? What is the assembly around, the materials? Can we use them after, or what are the values of what is the value of each individual material that will be valuable also for other productions in the future? So designers going into any space, really, whether you're doing systems design, service design, product design, we really need to have an understanding of the longevity and sustainability of what we're putting out there. I think question number one, should we be putting out there? Like, do we want more consumption? And if we're putting out there, we need to think of like a whole lifespan. And I think we touched upon that. I think there is a key to what you're saying also in Lisa, in innovation. Just because, we innovate in something too, doesn't mean that innovation is relevant 2 years from now, right? Like we need to be able to have the mindset of like innovating on the go and really having a more, adaptive behavior as a company or individuals, and really changing our behaviors or products quickly. And I think the innovation side, we need to look at other industries. Like we really need to look at what health tech did and where we are today in terms of like healthcare, not the system, but the technologies around it, or the automobile industry or any other like tech industry that is willing to spend billions on R&D. We really need to learn from them because guess what? They're ruling the world now, like they are as rich as countries, and they weren't necessarily concerned on today's savings. So we really need to like learn from those like behaviors too. Collaboration, I guess like we need to emphasize that over and over again, and cross industry collaborations, and really getting out of our comfort zone too, and not just working in similar patterns. And also we touched upon with Kai and others too, the big awareness and education component to all of this. And I would also love to hear more on how we do this. Obviously, we have these events, right? And then we're trying to educate our users. We try to educate our own clients. But how can we push this awareness also on the bottom up side, right? Like on the user end, so that we're not necessarily just waiting for policies to incentivize us to move towards a direction, or really, not that there's not a crisis today, but we didn't see it firsthand like the pandemic, but the crisis does exist. So we either in, a grand level are going to really start addressing this when we're too late. But if we can push the demand side and the user side to really seek products or systems and not buy into the ones that do not meet, these standards, how do we get there sooner, in addition to like some of the awareness efforts we're doing today?
I can
Any
share
ideas?
in fashion. Yeah, in fashion, the consumers are already demanding speed and agility and customization. So if the industry is saying, well, but they're not specifically asking for sustainability and circularity, you're missing the point again. All those things, if you're going to refashion your entire supply chain, you might as well bake in exactly what the customer is asking for. Agility, speed, customization, personalization, size and fit, all of those things. If you're going to redesign your entire infrastructure, it's an opportunity to bake in circularity, sustainability, and really rework the entire unit economics to understand how much more margin you can capture when actually addressing what the consumer needs and producing it locally. We've seen a minimum of 50% higher margin than producing overseas per unit. So I think it comes down to just building a better mousetrap that's more profitable. All of the S&P 500 companies can sit in their ivory towers and say, we're infallible, but it's changing more and more. Disruption is creating this virtuous cycle of cleansing the S&P 500. It used to be every 30 years that a company would live on the S&P 500. It is now down to 10. So if you think that you're going to exist in 10 years and you're not addressing your own disruption through innovation, you are sadly mistaken.
Yeah.
I can
Adding
speak
to
at food side.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Olkay.
Okay. At food side, it's a bit more complicated than fashion or others, I guess, because thousands of not only SKUs and products, but it's not easy for consumers to understand what's behind the scene for food production, or supply chain, or food. Like there are a lot of trends also happening, like the health trends, etc. Even like we are talking about now, meatless meats. I know it's very common in the US, but in Turkey it's just a very new concept, and even I am very suspicious how it will happen. It's very in the core of the cuisine. So such complications are making hard to talk such things, such demands to come from the consumer side, upon my experience. But it might be the issue for these years and might change soon as well. So, but what I experienced at least, share something at that side. So we did two things that we saw it worked well. The first thing is that not about the consumer to demand, but more like we went to the government and we changed a couple of laws that is not banning something, but it's more like incentivizing companies to do the right thing and then getting more financial benefits out of doing the right thing. So considering the fact that all these companies, as we all mentioned and Lisa mentioned as well, the margins are important, the incomes are important. So I think governments needs to take more roles at that part rather than waiting for consumers to demand. And then we started a campaign. I mean, not we, but we supported, let's say we initiated. First of all, with a private company like PNG, we did a huge campaign in Turkey, and 70 million people watched our ads, not to waste food, all Ramadan month periods. And then the government started the campaign, a Save Food campaign. And in 1 year, currently, just comparing it to the 1 year before, and whoever you would try to speak of food waste, no one will say anything. And they would just say, of course, we don't make it waste. And now, after 1 year of this campaign, everyone just started to ask, I mean, what's happening with these foods, leftovers in the supermarkets? So, I mean, if you want the consumers to demand something, you need to trigger them as well. This is what I experienced and what I see. So this is my point here.
Yeah, I mean, public endorsement and, you know, government backing
Yes.
obviously will expedite things
Very important.
exponentially.
Yeah.
You know, we see this in like countries who are adopting in their legislation and how they're like changing things much faster than other countries too when that happens. And I think we don't have the luxury to wait for any side. I feel like we have to like kind of like push from both ends. And to your point, you know, awareness efforts and media is a big player in this, and, you know, other like events as this or workshops and programs. These are all helping with awareness. But to Lisa's point too, also transparency within the system. And the possibility of that information getting out there or has to be out there will also really push companies to be able to do right. I mean, we saw so many, you know, ethical problems in the supply chain in the past years. And when they were, you know, out in the public, it was a huge reputation crisis for brands. And they immediately had to change the way they are doing things. It doesn't have to come to that. But if we do have transparency within our processes, like, it is a very simple analogy. If we know our food is toxic, we know we're not going to eat it, right? No one's going to eat something that is sold and like is toxic. Well, maybe cigarettes, but at least it will be in less consumption. But we don't know what goes into our clothing. We don't know what goes into sort of like the electronics we're using. We don't know like the spaces that we live in and the materiality behind it. So if we just had more awareness of what's really going into things that we're using every day, I think that would really slowly, but at least in a more sustainable manner, change behavior, because we don't want to harm ourselves or the environment. Like, nobody has that as a motive starting out their day. We just need to be like more mindful of it, kind of every minute of the day. And I guess like with that, I would love to kind of solely like close the conversation by, and this will go into both like potential solutions, but also some advice. That's how we typically end our What's Wrong with panels and podcasts, where, you know, if we do want to go into an industry where we want to make change, or push the limits a little bit or innovate, it's not an easy route, and we all know that here. So what would be your advice to anyone who is going to do that? We're going to try to do that. Who wants to go first?
Advice, yeah. Well, adding to the remark, if we really want to change something, you need the different players in this value chain. And the experience I have is normally there's a shock. I don't want to be too shocking, but a shock normally really adds speed to it. And a shock can be climate change, and I don't know how your weather is, but our weather was amazing wet at the moment with lots of rain. Rivers go over. We have really dead people around in Belgium and Germany. There are a lot of deaths because of the water. So that's a shock, and people get more aware. But a shock can also be a breakthrough in innovation, like Steve Jobs did with his way. He brought these different products in the market, and the funny thing was the consumer was not aware of it. He always said, according to his book, he said always, they don't know what they have to ask. I will provide what they need. That's quite interesting. But having said this, I think really live to the innovations, and like people here and also in the panel, I hear founders, co-founders of all kinds of ideas to improve it. I think that's absolutely key. I'm also very proud of this Dutch guy who says set up the clean up ocean activity. Well, these people are very important. So when you have a dream or you want to improve a certain situation, don't hold back, go for it. And also, I agree, awareness, like the circular economy I started with, in my view, I would have loved to see it going quicker. The complexity is not, the mindset is changed. And every time one player in this whole value chain has to start, it goes too slow. So how can we speed it up? So my advice would, how can we really speed up smart, innovative stuff to really contribute to environmental or social improvements? And circular economy is one of them, but there are many more, as the panel members here definitely have shown.
And this
I'll
will
speak
tie
to
to
that.
Lisa well in funding.
Yes, exactly. You knew where I was going. Yeah, absolutely. The primary way that we speed up innovation is through capital investment. And unfortunately, we've been sitting around collectively assuming that the industries are going to innovate themselves. And that generally does not happen, especially with transformational innovation. It's just against the grain of how they're currently structured, siloed, have archaic legacy infrastructure and systems. It's not their jam. So the primary way we create innovation is by funding it, which is what Silicon Valley does. And we see all these amazing innovations that are happening, but frankly, right now, we need capital to be deployed into diverse emerging fund managers. The diversity is not just a checkbox for gender or skin color. It is for lived experiences and really understanding the use cases that are different than what the people in Silicon Valley are addressing. You know, we certainly don't need another Juicero or Twitter for cats. What we need is something that is really going to impact, you know, the majority of people on this planet in a meaningful, life-changing way. And those things are harder innovations that require more capital than something that a Silicon Valley investor is looking to flip within 3 years. These are building the future of our entire life on our planet. And I think there's nothing more profound and worthy to dedicate your life to than that. So within fashion alone, BCG and Fashion for Good put out a study January 2020, where they finally quantified everything I've been saying for about a decade. The amount of capital that needs to be deployed every year just into early stage fashion supply chain innovations between now and 2030 is $30 billion. With a B, not millions, $30 billion. And I was asked in an article, how many billions are being deployed? And I said, oh, no. It is maybe 100 million. And that's primarily from emerging funds that really understand this space. And those funds are primarily female founded. And as we all know, women receive less than 2% of all venture capital, at least here in the United States. And if you're a woman of color, Latina, it's like 0.001. So I'm an anomaly, having raised venture capital for a tech company in the past, and now I'm a VC. We are deploying capital across the emerging technologies that will change life on this planet.
And I'm applauding that in silence, which, you know, I think there are so many advice and like lessons within that entire statement that I'm not even going to comment on. was perfect. And then, yeah, and Kai and Olcay, also like for both of you who are pushing this in a developing country, which is maybe like an added layer of challenge when you're doing a startup too, in addition to being a minority in a developed country as well. But what would be your advice?
Yeah, I would say that kind of topics we kind of touched around is the money and how do you that's the way that people get through quickly. That's kind of the universal understanding. We've had challenges. One of the biggest challenges in deploying our bags initially wasn't teaching somebody about what plastics do or where they come from or how long it takes to go away. It was almost reversing that plastics were thought of as very, like I said before, luxury product, and reversing that in where there are cultural issues and learnings that we need to be aware of and conscious of, as well as in a country where formalized education is few and far between. Many people don't go past an 8th grade level in the U.S. And even beyond that, education is not probably wouldn't even be considered much higher in a high school level in the States. So the way that I've almost always gotten through to business owners and C-suite people are, how do we make it profitable for you, or make it so it's not a loss on your balance sheet, even though these things are more expensive? And it's gotta sometimes come up with some creative, unique ways to do that, so they can feel good about themselves with the environment side of it, but also they can show that it's not going to be a big loss for that. So.
Hi everyone, just thought I'd pop in to thank you for the session and just see if we're about to wrap up this particular one. Perfect, thank you very much everyone. I love the points, especially around the collaborative and inter-industry collaboration, because I think it makes absolutely adds value to all of our conversations that we're having here at WasteBuild. Thank you, Pina. Thank you everyone else for your contributions to this panel. Really enjoyed it. So that's the symbol we're doing. So thank you very much. We're going to have a quick break now, and then we'll be rejoining with the Creating Circular Cities panel in about 2 minutes. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Right.